Hey everyone, welcome to our continued learning series. Today we're going to talk about project leadership versus project management. Now this is actually a pretty exciting topic I love to get into, and the reasons for that is it's not just about tools or technology. What it really is about taking things that are best practices in how you implement, but really creating what I call scalability. One of the things that you're going to find certainly in project management versus project leadership is there's some subtleties between these. So what I'm going to do today is kind of lead you through this in a guided tour. Obviously, this is not something in 30 minutes that you're going to walk away with a PhD. There are many, many deep rivers that you can dig into, whether it's talking about communication or leadership development or team management. There's a lot of things here, but what I've done today is kind of surface the top level items. And I think this will help a lot of you that are either in a project technology role, or maybe you're in a leadership role, or you might be in something that you're working on specifically that says, you know what, I can do more with what we have. So let me share my screen and we'll go ahead and continue jumping right into our overview today. All right, as we get started here, one of the things that is exciting about certainly in this particular topic is that, yep, we enjoy certainly delivering results on time, on schedule, within budget. But it's also important to note that as you're working in this type of environment, a lot of what we get into is the fact that in our overall environment itself is that we want to make sure that we are in a position to deliver value. Now let's talk about that for a moment. As you know, Advisicon, definitely deep in the technology side, looking at all things project program and portfolio management. But remember, the concept behind that is not just about delivering a project or having metrics. It's really changing a culture. And so some of this, when we get into project management offices or we start digging a little bit deeper, you find that the consulting, the methodology, the layering is really about getting to an end state, which is organizational development. I've been doing this for many, many years and certainly enjoy both blending the tools and the technology. But this topic really strikes at the heart of both growing leaders within an organization, scalability. It also steps into the function that we talk about, which is really how to basically take something to the next level. So as we think in terms of this, today's agenda, we're going to go over and talk about the difference between and at least understand project leadership and project management. It's important that we know kind of where these delineation or these breakoffs are. And as you begin thinking about, hey, look, I'm a great project manager, or you know what, I keep wrestling with changing my organization or streamlining what we're doing, we really start crossing into the difference between project leadership versus project management. Of course, there's a whole series of skill sets, as I mentioned. We probably could have, a 10-part series on some of the moving parts there. But today I want to surface top-level things that are both near and dear to my heart, and also hopefully will help you begin to scale and take advantage of growing from just a delivery manager to a leader. Now, part of that is also creating a culture of project leaders throughout an organization. Sometimes we call it succession planning. So we'll talk about creating environments where you'll be able to actually help make this happen. And what's fun about it is that if you've done project management, it certainly is a wild ride delivering some of these complex scenarios, but changing an organization that runs more efficiently is actually a lot of fun. It garners relationships outside of just delivery. So in thinking about this, we talk about the understanding of project leadership. I love this quote, and I reference it periodically there. And the idea is that the author there, Antoine de Saint, I can't even know if you say the last name correctly, Exupéry, wrote a book called The Little Prince. And he had this quote, which I find fascinating. It says, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men, gather the wood, divide the work, give orders, build a project schedule, set it up in Microsoft Teams. No, I added that part. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. So the idea is that we're not just saying, hey, we got to get this one thing done, which is build a ship. We're explaining the why. And this is important because we look at human systems or human beings, is that innovation, creativity may come from lots of different places. So when you think about project leadership, of course, we know it requires good software and technology, right? Well, yes, partially, but really more appropriately is that there is an entire approach to doing this. Tools only fit a certain part of the picture. And this is where I really get to step back from the technology side and really begin defining how do we structure and grow good project delivery with what we refer to as that project leadership. So first off, let's talk about defining project management itself. Many different flavors, disciplines, whether it's Prince 2 or Waterfall, or you're in the PMI world or Agile. But some of the things that we find very commonly is that we have a methodology. Best practices, we have life cycles. We typically plan, manage, execute, monitor. We have closeout activities, but there's usually a flavor of a process that goes with it. Typically, you're also wrestling with deadlines, right? Trying to meeting a schedule, looking at monitoring risks and issues. You're also controlling and managing sometimes the budget. Some project managers don't get to have to manage the budget, but at the same time, budget could be resources, right? How much effort do we have? What skill sets that we need? And project management, in many cases, is very tactical in nature. And so I will tell you that in organizations, this is how things get done, is by projects. But when we start growing into a leadership level, whether it's CXO officer or you're on a strategic planning committee, or maybe you're in a center of excellence for project or technology, we begin to think a little bit more strategically. And the idea is instead of just zeroing in on deliverables, which are important, what we want to do is begin thinking beyond that. And so while a project manager reports progress, delivers updates to stakeholders, in many cases, they are kind of a messenger and sometimes the shepherd that kind of herds the flock where they need to. What they aren't necessarily doing is looking at it at an organizational level. And so when you move into a leadership role, we begin to think very differently about what is that structure. So let's talk about project leadership. Darth Vader, in fact, today or any day that you find that the 4th of May is May the 4th be with you. Darth Vader certainly was a leader, but maybe not the type of leader that we're talking about, growing a culture of leadership. So in thinking through this, we talk about what really is a good definition of project leadership. And some of that really is just going beyond, but also looking at not just the mechanics of what needs to happen, but looking beyond into something further that says, hey, not just delivering one time, but can we make this repeatable? Project leadership is also people focused. Now think about that for a moment. How do we normally execute? Well, in the world of artificial intelligence and machine learning, we certainly are seeing more and more places where workflows and programmatic things are coming into place. But really, execution really needs to tackle and solve the human systems. And so we are people focused, equipping, empowering, supporting, and in some cases, challenging existing thought or architecture, or taking a look at the model and says, this won't work today, right? What got us here won't get us there. And so thinking that whether you're a project manager or a project leader, it doesn't matter whether you have a title or not, it really is something from within. And so one of the things we find in project leadership is that we move into what I call a coaching mode, guiding, nudging people, helping them kind of think through and solve issues. The beautiful thing about being a consultant, and I've been doing this for 27 years, is that in the consulting role, we get to talk about the elephant in the room. But the idea is that we're here to solve the problems and in many cases, think outside the box. But you can't do that without bringing the culture with you, the people with you. And so part of that is providing the vision and getting people motivated, creating an atmosphere of grace, which I'll talk about a little bit more, but an atmosphere of grace where people can learn, make mistakes, but also kind of solution oriented. Again, the idea of looking at the why may help people stretch versus just jumping into telling them how to do something. And so while we can say, yep, these are best practices, what we're trying to do is not just make it where the project manager or the project management component is what's delivering the value, is that we're focused on equipping people to begin to move up and begin to think and solve things just like a leader would do. Project leaders are builders. They typically just don't jump in and deliver a single project, and while they can and do, they really are looking at how to engineer an organization. Look at the teams. How do we look at this and make it scale? And this is fun. This is actually fun kind of stuff. It says, hey, look, I'm pretty good at delivering a project. I can run through here, check the list off. But what if I could transform this organization so we stop having these type of issues? So the idea is as a phraseology I call 2-second lean. And if you go out to YouTube or if you go out to the internet, you'll find lots of videos on this. But the idea of lean thinking is fix what bugs you, right? 2-second lean says if it saves you 2 seconds, do it. Grab some time every week that says, this is my lean hours. I'm going to try and streamline my processes. And this is a different level of thinking versus I'm too busy chopping wood to sharpen the axe. We begin to think about how to sharpen that axe. And part of that is also that project leaders, they absolutely drill into the team effectiveness. Part of that is looking at setting strategy in place. How do we motivate and optimize people, but also look at building that framework that says we can infuse ideation where people aren't just doing something because they're told to do it. They're trying to think of how do we align that to the business goals or the strategic organizations, or if you're in a nonprofit or an NGO, is how do I look at our mission and what we're trying to accomplish, certainly with the project, but is there something more we can be doing both longer term? So in that concept of leadership versus management, these concepts, it's really important. And I know you can go out and find lots of information about what's the difference between a boss and a leader, but really we're looking at the difference of the I versus we, or perhaps we're looking at how to not just wrestle with a single issue, but really own the issue. People own it and fix it and solve it. And again, the idea is that let's drive forward, solution thinking. So in these mindsets that we have, it's very similar to what an executive team or perhaps what an engineer does, is they look at something and says, you know what, we need to structure a place for people to live. It's going to be in a high arid desert community, which means there's not a lot of running water around here. So we need to figure out what does it take to accomplish this. And so in that idea of an executive, or we talk about a founder that says, I've got this brilliant idea and I really love doing this, but I don't just need to be a general manager that says, okay, let's run the operations, let's do the day in and day out things. While those are important, what we are working on is taking us into the next level. Chief Innovation Officer, I hear these terms kind of thrown out there. Chief Inspiration Officer, Chief Encouragement Officer versus Chief Enforcement Officer, or perhaps we call it Chief Execution Officer, right? The intent is that while we want to, of course, get things done, and in some cases you might be beholden to shareholders or stockholders, or perhaps your employees are your stakeholders that says we need to get here. The idea is that we're leading from the front. We're providing vision to the team, whether you're a C-level officer or a project manager or a team lead, is that you're helping them understand that why, that we can create a culture of accountability and also something called servant leadership. And you'll see this term kind of float out there, but the idea of servant leadership is that we really are serving our teams and organization, not just perhaps delivering the work themselves. The other part of that is that we're providing what the phraseology I've seen on the internet and other places, and I've watched some great videos of people, they talk about providing rations and raincoats, right? Giving them what they need, making sure they have materials, resources, the right tools to do the job, but at the same time, providing them shelter so they can get that done. Maybe running interference for the organization that says, hey, look, my project team doesn't need to wrestle with some of these other elements. I'm going to take those challenge on so that they can actually begin to work and execute. And perhaps involving them in that conversation in terms of how do we solve or address problems. One of the things that you'll find is that there is an absolute overlap and also a continuum, kind of like this moving pendulum that says you can start with project management, but we can continue to mature that and grow it. And so if we look at that pendulum or that continuum, is that yes, you need both. Can't just say, well, we're going to lead people and talk about how to do things. We actually have to get things done. But at the same time, project leadership looks holistically at the delivery system of the project. What are the systemic issues or metrics or things that can be supported or reinforced? Or perhaps what can we stop doing and maybe try something different? And so it really is this kind of cook in the kitchen, doing a little bit of saying, well, can we make this menu better? Well, certainly there are times that, you want to be able to tweak, and there's times you say, look, don't follow or change the recipe. We want to stick with this. But maybe the place settings at the table would be much nicer if we had red napkins and a candelabra versus we just coming it out and giving a paper napkin. There's a lot of ways to look at this, but the idea is that we're doing something, and to a phrase that I coined back in 1998, 1999 called building a project management culture. And what's great about this is that we really are looking at how to create a culture of delivery. Now, metrics are important, and one of the reasons Advisicon loves to jump in and do tools is not because we love tools. For tools' sake, it's because the metrics, the information will help us change or transform what an organization can do. We can spot problems. Hey, COVID just landed. It completely displaced everybody. We have to think very differently. What can we innovate and do? Well, metrics will help you be able to apply strategies, see if you're getting the results, shift the resources. You need tools and metrics to make that happen. And again, we think about where the time buckets are, or perhaps maybe where we're weak or we need shored up, but those elements are helpful in terms of understanding. And yes, there's a cost, a bit of an overhead to doing that, but you know what I hear from most executives? Most of the time I hear them say, I don't know what it takes to run projects in my organization. Or, hey, listen, every time I get a budget, people always never deliver on time, on schedule, or never within budget. We never have kind of an idea of what it's going to take to get there. Or if I need to change the direction of the ship, what do we not do? How do we prioritize? If I can't see, if I can't measure it, then I need some help there. So the idea is that project management certainly is about getting things done, but project leadership is really making change happen. Some of the things that I get into in terms of looking at the difference between portfolio management and project management, which is project management is about executing on time, on schedule, within budget, right? It is about doing the project right. Portfolio management is about doing the right projects. Maybe just because it needs to get done doesn't mean we just do it. Is there a better project? Is there another way to solve this? And so it's a higher level of thinking. And so as we look at the difference kind of between that project leadership and project management, we really roll into many, many things here. In fact, I had a lot of items that I was going to put in here, but I want to make sure, at least within a short period of time, you can grab a few of these and run with them. So one of those differences is the mindset of the project manager or the project leader or the person who's leading the team. And that's where I kind of define the difference between a consultant versus a contractor, right? The idea is that contractors come in, they do what they're told. But a consultant comes in and says, how do we get the stuff done, but how do we continue to make it sustainable? They wrestle with the elephants in the room. In fact, they're solution-minded. I love as a team leader and being able to say to my team, well, how would you solve that? Now, I have a lot of experience, and it didn't used to be that way, but I was amazed in my early 20s why I had a lot of the answers around the technology side, but I didn't have all the years of experience and wisdom in dealing with culture and culture change. And so as I began learning that, I brought in leaders and consultants to help me make sure that I understood. I had PhDs working for us to make sure that we were able to fathom culture change, human systems. But you know, the cool thing is it really boils down to is helping your organization or your people or your team be able to think about, hey, it's not just about checking off a list. It is that relational component. How do we think to a better solution? So thinking about the organizational health versus just project delivery. Again, same ingredients in delivering the project, but there's a spark of that innovation, that inspiration, the ability for us to really think about building or, hey, listen, why I can go to my wood saw table and cut the wood the same way every time, but what if I made a jig? What if I actually create a template and I could do a lot more? The idea is I'm looking at how to streamline things downstream and into the future. So some of these elements you can certainly look out there. There's a great book out there called On Becoming a Leader by Warren Bennis. And I've kind of tinkered with this table a little bit, kind of put some things that I think that are a little bit more appropriate. But again, great way to look at the difference between a project manager and a project leader. Really looking at not just building a plan and deliverables and times tables and perhaps estimates, but also aligning when we talk about a project leader is what's the vision and the strategy? If you go back to true requirements gathering, which we've written books on, built tools and teach classes on it, one of the fun parts about that is that before you just jump in and start figuring out what the requirements for your project are, understand the corporate business goals and objectives. This is why marketing is really important, right? Understanding vision, mission, and values, right? What we want to align is what we're doing. And sometimes a project may very easily with a solution or requirement come off path that says, you know what, that might solve the problem, but it doesn't meet the organizational needs. And maybe we don't need to have 15 of the same type of tool. We may need to kind of bundle these together. And so the idea of a project manager is that certainly going to plan when things need to be accomplished, but a project leader begins to determine, hey, what is it needs to be done and why? Are there strategies in helping us improve? We look at process, system, and procedures, which is great. I think absolutely you need a methodology. Find one, stick to it, or find a blended hybrid, Scrum or Fall versus Scrum, or Agile or Wagile or Waterfall. But whatever that may be, that process is important. But don't forget about the people, right? Their commitments, their ideas. How do we engage a workforce to help us solve? Being an educator or a trainer, one of the things I love to do is work with a class. And I will tell you, I have been humbled more often by my students with the questions I would never, ever think to ask, which is fun because I get to bring these questions back to the Microsoft engineering teams and go, have you thought about this? Well, what about that? And the idea is that in many cases, the emperor may not have clothes, right? And so we need to call that out. But at the same time, looking at that elephant from different vantage points, we see things differently. And so while we might be communicating the schedule to stakeholders as a project manager, what we want to do is paint the vision. What is that roadmap? How do we prepare to innovate or have regular introspectives? The idea of that looking into the project, doing lessons learned are helpful, but equipping your team to be engaged in that. And I always love that, do things right versus do the right thing. Really looking at the difference of project and a leader who's looking at more of the big picture. So as you think through some of these, you'll find that in terms of setting this up, you may not have control of your environment. You may not be part of a PMO. You may not even be a C-level officer. But if you're a small organization, start with you. Start with your team. If you're a project manager, you can begin to build and create this. And so the idea of a project leadership environment is going to have many different mindsets or steps that you're going to cross over. The idea is that it's not me driving, it is we. We look at that servant leadership. We talk about validation, right? Celebrate our successions, align with vision. And in some cases, there needs to be transparency. Part of what we're going to hear about a little bit is the ability to create trust. And in order to get a team to begin to step out of their comfort zone, there has to be trust. And so having trust and accountability are important, right? Trust, but verify. Inherently, we're looking at making sure that we're learning. And of course, we're going to have teachable moments. But the idea is that we own our stuff. And if we make mistakes, we learn from them and we create that environment of grace. And so people go, environment of grace. Wow, that's kind of an interesting phraseology. So I'd like to unpack a little this. And, by the way, my daughter is a little bit older now than these pictures, but she still eats snow every chance she gets. So we go once a year to the mountains. And if it's not snowing in the valley, she is a snow monster. But her great-great-grandmother was called Grace Wieslander. And my grandmother was called Grace Runcie. And so when we had our daughter, I wasn't sure I was going to have any more children. And so I was so blessed and pleased and excited. And so grace really is a gift. It's something that we don't deserve. In many cases, it's simple elegance. And really the idea is that we're going to honor or present in favor. And so this environment of grace means that we're going to come in there, we're going to make mistakes, right? We want people to learn and we're going to be gracious about it. Part of that is like we tried and we screwed up. Okay, we've learned from it. We might be strategic in where we're stretching and learning, but that environment of grace allows people to learn faster, learn from their mistakes where they aren't penalized for it. And so part of that is really making sure that we really move forward into kind of the options that we learn from in terms of setting up strong project leadership. Now, I like to show the antithesis sometimes, which is if we have an environment of negativity and we have I-centric teams and we have dictatorial delegation and perhaps we have micromanaging and we're critical of people constantly. We really have seen that, through some of these hard times that people have come out with, they're stressed. And so having that environment of grace really helps to take the fact that people don't have to show up for work or go to a team and really have to be on the defensive. They really are forward thinking. How do we get beyond the fear and mistrust to the fact that says we actually are going to help you solve this? And it isn't just the I invented it here syndrome. It's really the we invented a new way of doing things. So as we look at the skill sets behind project leadership, in whether it's any environment, healthcare, construction, IT, manufacturing, for-profit, nonprofit, you could talk about international cultures. A lot of times we have to look at what are the key elements that help put that together. And not just creating the environment itself is helpful, but we also want to get to a place that says, as we're working through our environment, we really want to look at what fosters and make this happen as quickly as possible. So we talked about trust, accountability, and solution-minded approach to things, solution thinking. Well, that's a problem, Bill. How do you think we should solve it, right? Hit the ball right back over the net. Let them wrestle with it. You may have the answer if you're the leader or if you're stepping into that role, but the idea is that we want people to begin to stretch. With trust, teams are not afraid of conflict. Now, in this cancel culture, and we hear lots of people talking about stressed and we've got to get things done and jobs are on the line, one of the things that happens is that people are afraid of conflict. And actually, there are some people who actually enjoy conflict, and that sometimes is a problem. But the idea is that conflict that's focused on a solution, meaning that if we trust each other, we're aligned to the mission or the goal, then conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, I'd rather err on the side of having more conflict and coming up with a better solution than having no conflict and have a mediocre or an untenable solution. There's a book out there by a gentleman named Patrick Lencioni, and he's got actually a bunch of great books out there, but the book's called The Advantage. And I really recommend people go out and read this. It really talks about leadership and creating a culture of leadership. But one of the things he talks about is conflict is actually good, right? We need to get in a room and be okay to wrestle and challenge each other's ideas, because iron sharpens iron, right? We want to have one strong resource working off another, but focused and channeled in really looking at the right solution. So as a leader, you want to coach and mentor your team versus just giving them answers or dictating. At Advisicon, sometimes I call it avoiding a temptatorship, right? I've got a lot of experience. I do know how the technology works. So do my teams, right? What I want to do is I want to make sure that as we create this succession planning where people can move and grow, is that they have to challenge, they have to wrestle through, they have to create those little wrinkles in their brain on how to solve and figure that out. And so one of the things that you'll find is that stress precedes learning. Right? If you're wrestling with a problem, there's stress. I don't know how to do it. I'm going to figure it out. But this stress will precede the learning. And to shortcut that process sometimes isn't the right thing. We want to push that and help our teams begin to learn and form their own neural net so they have that wisdom or experience. Obviously, we need to get into some great analytics, right? I think there's no getting around it. We want to have metrics. You can't measure what you can't see, but at the same time, these are important elements for us to be able to leverage and work with. So some of these skill sets really are for you to apply. And again, as we go back to that culture of leaders, you don't have to have all the leadership skills to experience this or to start. In fact, I tell people, start with yourselves. None of us are perfect. We all put our pants on one leg at a time. Inherently, we started somewhere. And the idea is bloom where you're planted. Wherever that is, take the challenge. Don't just be an execution manager, but think about how you can work. What's empowering about this is that you actually become more valuable to the organization because you really are aligned and trying to improve things. Yep, it'll be hard. Yep, it'll be frustrating. Yep, somebody's going to take your whoopee and it's going to get moved around, kind of like who moved my cheese. But the idea is that you're really on a journey. And so the Japanese word kaizen, which we hear in lean and lean process improvement and Six Sigma, is really that idea of continuous process improving. The idea that it is owned by you. Yep, you may not have control of all your circumstances, but you want to avoid I have arrived. If you figured out a great process procedure that works, wonderful. But what if somebody has a good idea? Should we not look at it? No, what we should probably do is look at it, evaluate it, test it to see if it actually will save time. And then after all of that, we can use it to replace the existing process or system. But the idea is that, don't rock the boat, it works, it ain't fixed, it ain't broken, don't fix it, is not the mentality that we want, especially in today's innovative day and age when technology are changing, needs are changing. We have volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, these VUCA environments, COVID. You know what? I've been around and I've seen Y2K, .com, wars. I've seen all these things happen. We've had the housing bubble. We've had the financial crisis. This will happen and it will continue happen. And after a while, you'll have a few scars on your forehead from banging your head on your monitor. But you know what? These things happen. So we want to continue to strive and seek out people who have that leadership. We want to basically learn from them, or perhaps begin to build your team with people that can either mentor you or you can mentor them. But the idea is that you're aligning kind of that leadership growth. And so that project leadership versus project management, again, great quote that's out there is, the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality, right? Own your reality. The last is to say thank you. And in between is to be a servant. Serve your teams, empower and equip your teams, be support. You might have the answer. Let them work through some of this. Give them that environment of grace. And the idea is you do want to define direction, goal, but the overall idea is that we want to make sure that we are helping our teams begin to start emulating the same thing. So some of the benefits that you'll find: results-driven teams and organizations. You find more what we call flexibility in delivering solutions. People are adaptive. You get a better leadership pool. You can draw upon people who are now beginning to think and emulate what you're doing. Not only do you find that, but you actually have increased over time project performance. And again, from an organizational change perspective, sometimes you cannot wait. You have to change, and it sometimes have to happen overnight. Well, people are more adaptive when they've been working through this process of sort of just project delivery as in project leadership. And again, it's fun. That personal satisfaction is always there. And from an organizational perspective is that you begin to find people start solving their problems. They're self-corrective. They begin emulating that. Again, remember, we're investing in these smart resources, these team members that are coming in. And it's amazing how many jobs are out there. People are throwing money around like it's crazy. But if you want to retain a culture, is that you want to basically put leadership in front and have the team begin to work together. Again, organizations need leaders at every level. And the idea is good leaders in the middle make better leaders at the top. So now the people at the top aren't having to invent and solve that. We begin to start stretching out, taking the bottom half of your plate, handing it down to somebody which makes it the top half of their plate. And you begin working together to solve that. Again, project actions, things to think about is that create that environment of we, not me. You want to transfer, instill that vision and creativity. And of course, mindset, right? Think about what is the solution. We always have problems. This is going to be around forever, especially if you have teenagers. You're going to figure that out pretty quickly. But inherently, the idea is work to a solution. You win as a team, you can lose as a team. But if you're aligned, it's important. And one of the things we talk about in peer 360 reviews is that leaders don't see everything. They have blind spots. In fact, in many cases, sometimes 75, 80% of visibility is there, but we're missing 20, 30, 40% visibility of what's going on. A team can help make sure you see more of what's that. And of course, if you're leading from the front, it creates that trust, that ability to say, you know what, I fouled up. I made a mistake here. I should have done this. Let's own it. How can we do better? And then we use these teachable moments with our teams to equip and empower them. Again, that validation and affirming that when people do things right, it's great. When they get things wrong, well, guess what? It's a learning moment. And again, we want to work through some of that. So in terms of that visibility is that, as an individual project manager, you might be having your eye on the prize driving, but you may be missing the big picture. Right? There may be a corporate merger going on that you have no idea about. But if we're looking at the organization as a whole, we'll begin to find ways that do things better. And we can avoid some of the pitfalls or the sharks that will certainly come back and bite you. So again, from an organizational perspective, that idea is that leadership leads to results. And of course, that's important for us, especially if we think about blue ocean and red ocean, right? Red ocean is where in fact, if you haven't read the book, recommend you look that up. But the idea is red ocean is where everybody's competitive. There's a lot of competition. Blue ocean is doing things differently, moving out into an area where it isn't as tumultuous. And so that takes a different level of thinking. So here are some great resources for you. These books are wonderful. I've read them, and there's lots of tidbits that are out there. A lot of time people ask about what are some things that we can reference, but I recommend a few of these. Positive Leadership, Appreciative Inquiry, The Ascent of a Leader, and of course, Health Your Bucket. That's a good one. Really looking at how we're investing in ourselves and others. So as we think through this, I'm happy to have spent this time today. I hope this was valuable for you. I hope it challenged some things and gave you some insights. As you know, if you have any questions anytime, reach out. My Twitter handle, email, love to chat, love to strategize, and love to see you begin implementing project leadership and really executing on results. So thanks for attending today. Have a good one.